Hello once again, and thanks a lot to everyone for buying brand tactics. I guess you did. Otherwise, then this is going to be super confusing for you. What I wanted to talk about today was the main thing is to sort of help you really sort of navigate the deck, because I know that when you get just big old wad of cards and all this stuff, I think it's a bit sort of overwhelming and intimidating, and how do you know where to begin? Obviously, the deck has a structure. It has a sort of like a sense of an order to it, which hopefully is overall pretty self-explanatory. But you can actually make it even more simple than that. And that is essentially what the strategy super system is. This recipe card is, in my mind, it's kind of like a deck within a deck. In fact, this is going a little bit over the top, but you could almost say that all the other cards in the deck around it are sort of supplementary, but this is the spine. I would probably have, obviously we wanted to limit the recipe cards to not being too long. There are some cards when you get into the more executional end of the deck, which I would probably add on to here as being other essential bits. But the crux of this recipe, this is really what's going to give you sorry, hang on a sec. This is really what's going to give you the results. And it's what's going to give you the leverage over other businesses. Because we got to always bring it back to what are we doing here? What are we doing with this deck? What is the point? For me, the point is very simple. It's to create a business that doesn't have any direct competition. Because you think about it, if you can find a way to sell something which, number one, people want, and number two, they cannot get from anywhere else, then that is the license to print money. Okay. So most of the deck, certainly the strategic part, is about discovering what that thing is that you can sell that fits into that equation. And then once you've figured that out, the sort of the creative end of the process and the executional end of the process, well, that's actually kind of like pretty straightforward, because you've said, okay, well, we are selling this really sort of unique, interesting, powerful thing. All we need to do now is go out there and execute that and sell that to the world. So that's kind of like the easy part. The hard part is actually deciding what your offer is in the first place, what your strategy is in the first place. And that is essentially what the strategy super system is all about. This is probably the kind of like the most raw, sequential way that you can tease out, okay, well, what is my business really selling? What is the thing that if I put it out there in the market, people are going to say, I want that, and you're going to be able to name your price for it. So I'm just going to kind of like talk through the cards. I'll try and put in a couple of examples. I'm not very good at that. So I'll try and be conscious. And you can see how it all hangs together. So the first card in the system is this one, the true competitor. It might even be the first card in the deck, or it's pretty close to being the first card in the deck anyway. And the thing with the true competitor is you are trying to establish, first and foremost, and you can't do anything until you've established this, what actually is your competitive set. Now, it's saying, confirm your speaking language. It thinks I'm talking in Dutch. No, I'm not talking in Dutch. I don't know what you're talking about. Okay, let me just fix that. Sorry. All right, so you're trying to figure out who your competitive set is, because you cannot make any moves and you cannot build a brand of any coherence without knowing that, because everything you do is relative. Right? Maybe this is one very basic error which some people are going to make in this situation, where they don't understand that everything they say is relative to the other options that the customer has. So a lot of people just think, okay, I want to be about this, and here's the way I want to present it, and I'm just going to go out there and do my thing and all will be well. But the problem is, when you do that, you're probably actually just going to end up doubling up on what other people are offering, which therefore commodifies your category and makes it extremely difficult to compete and drives down your profit and all the bad stuff that we want to avoid. So you've got to figure out who you're up against. Now, of course, you're going to have some brands who you're up against that are very, very obvious. So basically, the competitors who look like you. So, I mean, on a basic, if you're selling cereal, there are other cereal brands. If you're selling cars, there are other car brands. So there's always those very obvious ones that you don't really need to be told about. But with the true competitor, what you're looking for is for non-obvious competitors, because you've got to think that the actual definition of a competitor is not other brands that look like you, although of course they are competitors too, probably. It is other things that people might buy or even do instead of buying you, right? It's all about those alternative options that the customer has. That is going to map out your true competitive set. Now, excuse me. Now, the reason that you want to figure this out isn't just because, of course, it's good to understand the competitive set, because then you understand the consumer better and then you can build a better brand, blah, blah, blah. That's the obvious part of it. There's a cooler part of it as well, I think, which is that when you understand these sort of alternative, non-obvious competitors, these give you alternative, non-obvious enemies that you can attack. Okay. And sometimes just switching your focus to a non-obvious competitor can be the complete strategic unlock. So to give you an example of that, and actually this is an example which we can follow this example pretty much all the way through the system. I'll try and bring up a couple of other examples too, but it's probably the great strategy case study. A lot of you will have heard it before, but it always bears repeating because it's so pure and on point. So essentially, Southwest Airlines, who, as some of you may know, they basically invented the low-cost airlines category. They, back in the days when all airlines were basically focused on business travelers, not sort of cheap travelers, you could pretty much argue that the crux of their insight was to say, okay, look, we know that we're competing with American Airlines and United Airlines and everyone else, fine. But you know what? We're actually also competing with buses. Then you ask the question, well, if an airline tried to not compete with other airlines, but tried to compete with buses instead, what would that look like? What would they have to change? How would they have to adapt their offering, adapt their messaging and everything else in order to be a viable alternative to buses? Suddenly, boom, 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 all the bricks fall into place and the whole thing seems like the most obvious idea ever. So, of course, it wasn't obvious at the time because nobody was doing it. So you can get in these situations where when you identify a non-obvious competitor, almost instantly, all the bricks fall into place. And you say, look, if we actually think about ourselves as being an alternative to this thing, rather than all the obvious things over here, that is going to be a big unlock for us. You know, a client, I worked for a client here in the UK a while back, and they were essentially a sort of healthy cereal bar brand. In fact, they were the one who sort of originated the category. But over time, that category had become extremely crowded. And not only that, but all of the new entrants were basically much more healthy than they were. So they kind of lost any leverage in their own category. So again, long story short with that is that what we realized is that, okay, fine. Basically, they're pretty uncompetitive as a healthy snack bar. But they had certain characteristics which put them much closer to the world of candy bars like Snickers and stuff like that. When they were in that place, suddenly they had leverage. And what was really interesting was that you could actually walk around stores where obviously the store had a degree of flexibility and choice over where they merchandise the products. And many supermarkets were already proactively merchandising their bars in amongst the candy bars against the wishes of the brand. Because the supermarkets, they were 2 steps ahead of the brand. They knew that really this was a candy bar competitor, not a healthy snack bar competitor. And that was where the product performed better. So again, you do that in that case in a supermarket, a literal shift of shelf can actually be a strategic unlock. So that is the main thing with the true competitor, that you can sort of like not only paint a clearer picture of your context, but find those unlocks. Now, moving on to only is better than best. One of the things which should be pretty clear from the deck is that I'm trying to encourage you to not be better than your competitors. That is strategically weak sauce. You've got to be the only thing that you are. So, because if you're the only thing, then you're the only option. And if you're the only option, then you can charge what you want and you can make bigger profit and people are going to come to you and you don't have to get in a big fight with all the other brands who are offering the same thing as you. Now, the only is better than best card is essentially a way for you to start to tease out the unique attributes that you already have. So rather than worrying about, oh, well, what could we do that's different? No, no, no. Actually, assuming that you're dealing with a pre-existing brand and this isn't a new startup or something, actually, you've already got loads of different things. And chances are there are going to be some things in there, ways that you are different, which you've never even thought about, which are actually already giving you leverage. So on that, essentially what you do is you compare your business to the competitors, which also includes the non-obvious true competitors. And you say, okay, well, what factors, how are we different here? What thing, even if it's super trivial stuff, because you can miss some stuff. You're laying down, if you don't have the card here, should just remind myself the different characteristics. Yeah, you're just laying down all these hard practical examples. And as I really emphasize on the card, you cannot have anything subjective here. You can't say, well, our candy bar tastes better than the other candy bar. No, 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 no. That would not be acceptable. You can say our candy bar has got peanuts in, that candy bar doesn't have peanuts in. That's a fact. But our candy bar tastes better is not a fact. In fact, even if you've got like research saying that it's a fact, it's still not a fact. It has to be something which could be recognizable to the market as just being an objective, undeniable truth. So you're going to list out all of these different ways that you're better. And that is kind of going to give you this sort of map of potential. The Southwest Airlines example, again, I don't know how it actually happened back in the day, but before, when they were just another generic airline, they might have listed out and said, for sake of argument, well, you know what, the routes that we fly on are actually not very competitive with the routes that American flies on because we've got less money, so we can't get the best time slots at the best airports. So if you're a proper business traveler, we're a pretty bad option because we're going to fly you to a crummy airport or at an inconvenient time. So like that is a difference in this hypothetical picture I'm painting. They would have said, okay, we have these practical differences in terms of our routes to the other airlines. Okay, it's not good, it's not bad, we are just different. Okay, so they could list down something like that. The candy bar, or the healthy snack bar that I mentioned. In fact, a practical difference that they had with the core of that category, frankly, is that they had a hell of a lot more sugar. Normally, that's the sort of thing that a brand would just sort of ignore because it's that's a bad thing. So we're not going to list that down as an advantage. But any difference, good or bad, is an advantage. Okay, so they could write down, okay, look, we have 50% more sugar than the average of the category, something like that. Which again, ultimately, you can see how you can follow that through to where they ended up going. So you got to get all this stuff down on the table. And then you should have a lot of stuff. You have an awful lot of stuff. And that is the fodder that you're going to need for the value mining card. Let me just pull that out just so that I, again, don't forget what on earth it was all about. So the value mining card then is sort of like where it all comes together, because what you're going to do in this one is you're going to take these differences and you're going to see, okay, is there a hypothetical consumer value that arises from these differences? Now, what we're doing as businesses and what we're doing as brands is all a business is, and the whole deck is, again, pushing back to this central idea. All a business ever can be is a system designed to generate value. And then obviously people give you value in exchange in the form of money, right? So all a business is really ever trying to do is trying to maximize the value it puts out into the world so it can maximize the value that it takes in exchange. So because of that, any brand or sort of brand identity is just an expression of value. It's just a way of saying, here is the value that we have been that we are in this world to generate. If that's value that you need or you want, then come to us. And if it isn't, no probs. So at some point in the process here, we have to leap from practical differences to saying, what is the value of that, the thing that people are going to pay for, to the customer? And that's basically what you're doing with the value mining card. You're looking at these values and you're asking the question, how on earth could this possibly be a good thing for someone buying? So in the case of the bar, how on earth could it possibly be good that this thing has got way more sugar than everything else? The answer as it obviously is that it tastes a lot better when it's got more sugar. And actually, when you then that then pushes you in the direction of a different type of consumer, the candy consumer, for whom this product is actually much, much more healthy anyway. And then you start to generate leverage. Or in the case of Southwest, you could say, all right, well, we got these crap routes, fine. But but you know what? Not all passengers care about the time that they fly, or not all passengers care that they fly into the best airport. What kind of passengers are those that don't care? Obviously, the answer was, you know, touristing, non-business, non-time pressured passengers. And again, you can pull that through. You can pull that through to the value offering. So I use a similar example on here. Actually, the Nintendo Switch one is a very classic one about how, you know, they could never really keep up with the power struggles, literally trying to make powerful consoles in the console category, and they just found a way to flip that into a new consumer value with the portableness of the Switch. So hopefully, what you see here is that, like, going through these cards, you're generating difference, you're generating texture, you're generating uniqueness, and then finally you're just making one little flip over to say, all right, great, and so what does how is that uniqueness good? And suddenly you see the opportunity for a brand. Now, what should be kind of obvious here is that, you know, you're not gonna. It's unlikely you're not going to sort of come out with just a sort of like a slam dunk, oh, if we talk about our business in this way, then everything's going to make sense, and we're going to have a much better brand. That is possible, but normally what you're going to find in this exercise is you're probably going to find something that's just a little tendency towards unique value, a little sort of gap that you could exploit, but which you probably are nowhere near exploiting enough, because chances are it's not deliberate. It's something that you're just discovering now, because if it was deliberate, you would have already done it and you'd already have an amazing brand and you wouldn't even be going through this exercise. So what you're going to have to do is, when you find that little gap in the door, you have to then burst the door open. So you've seen a potential form of consumer value, but then you've got to push that so much harder through executing across the whole business. So again, the Southwest thing, fine, let's say that they did find it that way. There's so many more things they had to do to change that business to truly make it fantastic for the low-cost traveler and to invent that airline. They had to get rid of business class. They had to get rid of lounges. They had to rationalize their fleet, so they only flew one type of plane. They had to improve their turnaround times at airports to lower cost, blah, 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 blah. So you see how, like, again, I'm not saying that it actually unfolded the way I've been explaining here, but you see how that one little glimmer of new consumer value, you then have to take responsibility for, like, pushing it out. You can't just say, oh, okay, there we go, there's the consumer value, we've done it, now let's write a tagline and then all will be well. You generally need to push much harder. And one way that you can push harder is with the next card, which is my favorite card in the whole deck, which is Contrarian Value. Again, let me find this. Thanks. Contrarian Value. So in the instructions on this card, I actually don't link it directly to value mining. So I don't link it directly in this flow through the strategy super system. But you can do. You've just got to kind of like break the instructions a little bit. So with the value mining thing, hopefully what we've done is we've identified, you know, a point of difference against our competitors. What Contrarian Value enables you to then do is you want to flip that into something that's better than a point of difference, which is a point of disagreement. Points of difference are good, but they can be copied. Points of disagreement are better because they can't be copied. Because if you frame this in terms of finding a way to disagree with something that the competition holds dear and values, then what that does is it puts them in a bind. Because if they think, oh, that's a really good idea, we'll do that too, they're like, oh, but we can't do that because it is contingent on undermining something that we care about. I'll bring it back to the Southwest example. Like, if you're basically Southwest and you're saying, you know, no more, no more. We're just gonna be shit for business travelers. American Airlines can't turn around and say, "Oh, that's a really good idea. We'll do that too," because their entire business is built on business travelers. So that is like the ultimate kind of chess move where you can't chase. And the simple way that you do that is you just generate a disagreement. So you want to sort of take your value, the value that you sort of uncovered, and you want to push it further and say, how can I frame this so that it is in direct contradiction or opposition to whatever it is that the competition is talking about? Uh, that's the that's how you sort of take things to a whole nother level, a level that goes beyond just strong differentiation and actually moves into sort of strategic mastery. Uh, so and it's also what's also cool about this is that when you move on to the executional side of things, sort of like the more kind of creative things, you actually then have a bit of fodder to play with. You actually have a bit of texture. You can sort of have fun with this. You can push against the brands. You can actually position yourself in direct opposition to them. So you can start to become a bit kind of contrarian and a bit edgy, which is always a nice thing to do as well. So that's going to be doubly useful. It's not only strategically useful, but it's kind of like creatively useful when you get through to that. Now, the final card, and I'll wrap this up before half past, so we've got plenty of time for questions. The final card here is the challenge trap. So let me just actually dig this one out again to make sure that I do it justice. So,
can you show us the card quick to the screen?
Sorry?
Can you show us the card to the screen for a moment, too?
That's the one. That's the one. The green one. So sorry, I actually haven't thought about this card in a long time, but it's a good one. So essentially, here you're trying to catch yourself in the lie that most people are going to tell themselves, which is they're going to claim that they are different when actually, really, all they are is just furiously disagreeing. I mean, where all they're doing is furiously agreeing with their competitors. I think this is particularly difficult in categories where there is a really sexy aspirational market leader, because what happens is that like the brands in those categories, they then sort of like the upcoming ones, the so-called challengers, they become wannabes basically. And they kind of like the reason maybe in some cases they even got into that category is because they thought that brand was so cool and they wanted to do the same thing too. But of course, like this is a trap, because then you're just going to be fighting the status quo with the status quo. So you need a way to really keep yourself honest and to tell yourself and to prove to yourself that no, what you are offering is actually genuinely different. And so essentially the exercise on this card is to do that. Now that you've found this this value offering and these sort of like different bits and pieces about what your strategy is going to be in the market, you've just got to cross-reference them against the other brands. And, as I said here, you don't have to be you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be different across every single potential level, but you do need to be sort of demonstrably different. The other interesting thing is the bit at the end of the card, where if the other brands that you're comparing yourself to are quite weak, then you can kind of cut yourself a bit of slack and think to yourself, you know what, we might actually have a very similar offering. But because they aren't necessarily bigger than us or richer than us or intimately associated with that part of the market, it's still up for grabs. And we could probably, perhaps with use of some of the other cards, like the creative canvas, etc., we could probably still win that fight. So maybe the ground that you've identified isn't truly unique, but it might still be up for grabs. So, that's your little sort of like a little bit of wiggle room. But my God, if you find yourself just basically putting yourself on a collision course with, a big, well-known, attractive brand, you've just got to go back to the drawing board. And it's insane the number of brands out there who are kind of mini-me's in their categories. So yeah, that you don't want to be doing that. So I rattled through that. I hope that was reasonably coherent. But what hopefully you can see is that the kind of like flow going through those cards, it does have the potential to kind of give you the unlock that everything else is going to hinge on. Now, a lot of the other cards could do that unlock too. And normally the process is not going to be this linear. It's quite, in fact, I'd say it's quite unusual for the strategic process to be linear. So don't hold on to this too tightly. Don't say, aha, well, the strategy super system, I'll do this exercise, this exercise, this exercise, and then it's going to spit out the answer. It is possible that it will not spit out the answer because it could be a completely different card that spits out the answer for you. All these cards at the front end of the deck are really doing is they're trying to break your thought patterns and throw up ideas and angles which you haven't had before. So that can be done in a lot of different ways, not just this linear way here. But that being said, it's a pretty good place to start, I guess. So Naomi, should we do some questions now?
Yeah, we have a question from Jem.
Or shall I?
Jem, do you want to ask it?
Obviously, working at Vipdex, the quote, Harley Davidson, I thought was, it always really helped me understand that tactic. So could you share that for people that don't have a deck and elaborate a little bit on it, please?
Yes. No, I should have mentioned that because that is the crux of the true competitor card. I have that written on there, and I wish I'd come up with this, but I didn't. But somewhere, somehow, I imbued the line: "The true competitor of a Harley isn't a Yamaha; it's a conservatory." And I think this is very, very true when you think about the way that people think about buying, like particularly with like using that example of a Harley. You know, there is obviously a class of people out there who are motorbike riders who are looking for a motorbike to take them from point A to point B. And possibly those people then look at all the motorbikes in the market and decide which one is right for them. Harley riders, for the most part, are not like that. These are people who've probably never had a motorbike ever before. Maybe it's a present to themselves when they're retiring or when they got a big bonus at work or something like that. And they've got other responsibilities and they've got other ways that they could spend that money. It's a sort of like lifestyle choice. And yeah, like maybe to use the sort of like the stereotypical example, maybe their wife is pressuring them to get a conservatory and they're like, oh, which way do I go? And equally, it could have also been a boat instead of a conservatory, you know, or something like that. So that's just a really like nice, quite extreme example of how broad you can go when looking for a true competitor.
Next, we have a question from Richard. Richard, do you want to read your question out loud?
Yeah. So, hi, Alex.
Hey.
So again, full disclosure, the brand tactics I ended up getting because I bought the whole Ultimate Collection and it kind of made sense. But as I was going through it, it became really apparent that for small business owners and for people who work in branding, this is really helpful. How would you recommend that we could take this and use it to build a brand for a team or department or a personal brand? Obviously, where the competitors are not necessarily people offering different products, but you're more just trying to make sure people are aware of you, what you do, and want to come and talk to you to help solve their problems.
Yes. So the personal brand is in principle very easy because you can almost treat it, well, you can sort of treat it exactly the same. Now, if you're talking about a person who's sort of out in the market on their own, like let's say a consultant, then there's a one-to-one comparison because essentially like the person is the business and all of these elements can just be used identically, but for the individual. And it might be, for example, that when you are searching through some of the characteristics of the business, so to speak, these are actually characteristics of yourself. as a human being, or even preferences and the way you look or whatever, stuff like that. It's the same thing. You can just translate it across. Now, when you're talking about someone within an organization, I do think that kind of like adds a layer of complexity to it, because you're not in the open market in that situation. The market is the ecosystem of the organization. Now, if you think about what I was saying about what is a business, it's a system designed to deliver value. Well, when you're out in the open market, that could sort of be literally anything, because the world is your ecosystem. And so if the value offering is coherent within the context of planet Earth, then it's coherent. When you're within an organization, it's the same thing, but instead of the world, it's the organization. So you just need to shrink your frame of reference. So the market that you are operating in as this business of a team or an individual, the market is the business itself. And so the value that you are generating, again, you can go through all of the same stuff, but the value has to somehow be relevant to the business at large. Now, the best way of doing this in a sort of purely technical level is if you really understood the strategy of the business that you're in, you should then be able to ladder that down to the way that you as an individual or team can best serve and push the agenda of that strategy. Now, the caveat with that is that most businesses do not have a clear or coherent strategy, so you're not necessarily going to be able to connect with that. So that is the on paper version. In practice, it's not going to be like that. In reality, I think you can probably view the business as being a little bit more of a sort of a blank sheet of paper, and just again find these potential avenues of difference. And then, in a similar way to when we were talking about the value mining, interrogating, okay, is there value here for the organization? That's always the thing you're going to have to go back to. You can have an idea of like, well, look, this team could actually really be the champions of whatever. Okay, that's the sort of easy bit. But you've got to then take that next step, and you've got to look at it from the business's point of view and how truly valuable that's going to be to the business. And that's where you've got to be sort of quite honest and quite harsh with yourself, because you've just got to make those things connect. But so you're going to have to do some quite sort of lateral thinking to sort of translate the cards to a within business situation. But I do think it's totally doable. I'm just looking at one card here. Just pick a random card, category cliches, which is all about identifying the obvious expected offerings within a category, just so you can basically not make yourself all about them. Well, in a job role in a business, there is also such thing as category cliches, except it would be job role cliches. So I'm a product manager in this business. What is expected of a competent product manager? Boom, boom, boom. These three things. You're like, right, okay, already I know I'm not going to be about one of these three things. Not to say that I should be crap at them. Maybe they're the requirements of the job, but if I'm going to sort of like stand out and create space for myself within the organization and space to grow and have influence, I know that I'm going to have to move outside of these three things. So that's like a sort of like a good example of how you can just take a card and flip it across. That kind of makes sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Cheers.
Next up, we have Chris. Chris, do you want to share your question? Okay, I'll read it for Chris. Can you discuss the relationship between this deck and related digital offerings? I'm not sure quite the direction of what he's meaning.
Yeah, I'd need to know more about related digital offerings to answer that. Okay, cool. If you want to follow up, feel free, but otherwise we'll move on to another one.
Cool. So next we have Pierre. Pierre, do you want to share?
Oh, sorry. I think Chris actually... Chris actually did follow up. He says, I know the decks have other pieces that you sell and pair with the deck. The only other piece with this deck is the digital vault. Actually, no, I think there are mirror boards as well. Sorry, but I actually didn't make the mirror boards, so I'm not actually super clued up to that. Other than to say that obviously the mirror boards give you the practical canvases that you can actually then go and use to sort of. They make the cards that bit more practical. Jem, I don't know if you want to sort of elaborate a bit on the mirror boards.
Yeah, I can do. For anyone that hasn't used Miro, it's a collaborative tool. So it's like an online whiteboard, which you can use it on your own or with other people. It's I love it. I use it for all kinds of things. So we've created a Miro board for each of the tactics in this deck. They should be in the vault already, but there's a bit of a delay. So if anyone wants to let me know which cards they would most like the Miro boards for, I can send you a link, and I will link to the one for this tactic, or this recipe, and all the tactics within it in the chat in just a moment. But yeah, it's really good if you're running a team like workshop and you want to record all of your information about the event, the activity in one place. It's got some good collaborative tools for everyone giving their ideas and voting anonymously for stuff as well. So yeah, it's super tool, and I love it.
Awesome. I should use that actually. And the other thing is the vault, the video content. So that is, for the most part, that's me explaining each and every one of the tactics in more depth. But I also, for the most part, I add a sort of bonus tip for each one as well. So you can check that out for just kind of like more texture and more clarity on the cards.
So next up we have Pierre. Pierre, do you want to expand on your question?
My question was about the vault. I was waiting to have all the mirror on the vault, but I don't have it by now. So you quite answer it by now.
Coming as soon as possible.
Thank you.
We're on
Thank
it.
You. Okay, thank you.
So next up is Solly from Canada.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. So here in Canada, we have a lot of people and very few positions. So I'm talking about job applicants. And if I were to learn how to build a personal brand for myself to distinguish myself from other applicants, which cards would you recommend? Thank you.
Wow. You really put, so that's like the last question, but you really put me on the spot doubly. So, because I've never thought about that specifically, but I'm just going to try and sort of like quickly riff an answer for you. So from the cards that we've talked about already, I would say only is better than best. I think is a very, very obvious one. Because you've got to start to like tease out the sort of the quirkiness that you as an individual have, and then how you can which then might be of value to an organization. So obviously then you can combine that with value mining, which is where you're sort of pulling that through to the value of an organization. Category cliches, which I mentioned before, I think is good to just get an idea of what is the basic stuff that I'm up against, that I'm up against. Like, what is the stuff that I need to sort of like build on top of, that I need to do better with than other people. Just going to quickly flick through to see what other interesting things come out. Interesting stranger, if I remember that one correctly, I think is a good one, because this is where you're actually trying to get the perspective of another person. Very hard to be objective on yourself. You really want to use other people to sort of judge you as much as possible. So that's a good way of just actually seeing things that are true about yourself, which you have probably not really noticed. And then I'll pick one other one. Let's go for.
Can I give a good example here, Alex? I think it's
Oh yeah,
contrarian.
crack on, yeah.
I think it's contrarian value, where you always see this trope about people in job interviews where they say, "Oh, everyone else tells you they're really hardworking. I'm not. I am lazy as hell, and that's why you should hire me, because I will find the most efficient way to do this, and I will get twice as much done as everyone else." So is that contrarian value? Would that be?
Yeah, I love it. I hadn't thought about that at all. And yeah, so in the context of a job interview, and not saying just some boring crap, which is what everyone's going to be saying, then yes, definitely. It would be pretty cool to have a way to build some disagreement with your sort of competitive set, the other candidates. Of course, use with care about what you're going to say that you disagree with. But in general, yes, that's certainly like if you want to kind of like have a message, because obviously, it's an interesting point too. A business has got a very clear, concise message, right? Do you as an individual, do we as people, do we have a message? Do we have a tagline, so to speak, for the individual? Now, I wouldn't necessarily recommend literally writing a tagline for yourself, or at least not sharing it publicly. But I do think as an exercise, that would be super interesting. What is the just do it for you, right? And yeah, the contrarian value and half of the cards in the deck, frankly, are going to guide you towards that. So I do think that would actually be pretty cool thing to think about. I hope that answered the question.
Next question we have is Zika. I'm sorry if I'm saying your name incorrectly. Zika Lopez.
Yeah, hi, Alex. My question, once you uncover your brand or your core idea, it seems the challenge for me is how do I express that in a visual identity so people can connect the core idea to something tangible, whether it be colors or a creative direction. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I do. So I assume, incidentally, just to double check, you yourself are not a designer, right?
Correct.
Okay. So there's an implicit assumption in all of this, which I actually didn't make explicit, I think, on any of the cards, that I think that design is one of those things where you have to pass over the responsibility to specialists, and your job is simply to give them the best brief possible. Now, the further you can go with all the material in here, which is very sort of concept and copy driven material, the more you're going to be able to give the designers to play with. And I think that, let me just get the right card. There is the card Power Platform. That's where you're translating your strategy into consumer-facing text, which indeed might include tagline and stuff like that, a sort of whole brand narrative. This is the thing that you particularly need in order for a designer to jump off. So I would actually see the output of that card, where you're basically writing out your offer, your idea, as you said, but you're writing it in a way that has got a creative angle. And NB, you could obviously get a copywriter or someone like that to do that for you. You don't have to do that yourself. This is also a creative task. So it might also be, it also might be good to get someone else's eyes on it. But this is the thing that then you should then be able to follow through to design. And I think that people, they jump to design a bit too quickly. Design is very much, in my view, the very last thing. You're kind of like us. The order of play is something like, what are we offering? How do we communicate that? And then how should it look? That order, 1, 2, 3. And, people will do that in all sorts of weird orders, and then they're really going to get themselves in trouble. So if you've got that in that order, 1, 2, 3, and then you give that to really good designers, they're going to find it the easiest brief ever. They're going to find it a piece of piss, and you're going to get great work back. I would suggest there is one card in here that actually is, at least one anyway, that is explicitly related to design, which is cross-category copying, which is a pretty interesting one. And the idea behind that is that when you've got your idea of your value offer for your category, that needs to be unique within your category, but it doesn't need to be unique in the world at large, right? There will be other brands in completely different categories who have got a very similar value offer in a different space. And sometimes those will be very famous brands. And then what you can do is you can copy their aesthetics to some extent in your category so that you then communicate sort of subconsciously that offering using things that people already understand. So a great example of this is Domino's Pizza. Domino's Pizza, when you think about it, they're not a pizza brand, they're a delivery brand. Okay, the pizza is secondary, the delivery is the primary. And so look at Domino's logo. Does it not look rather like FedEx or someone like that? It doesn't look like a pizza restaurant, you know, all that sort of old world Italian stuff. It looks like a logistics company. Now, this therefore communicates the kind of delivery efficiency, which is what Domino's is all about. So I think that's really, really cool because it makes them look very different from other pizza brands, tick, and it also helps them communicate their value offering, double tick. So if you can find things, the interior of a Tesla, I think, looks a lot like the inside of an Apple store, which makes sense given that Tesla were trying to have this sort of tech-like offering in the automobile space. So you can see quite a lot of examples like this when you start to look for it. So that's a kind of cool trick, I think.
Thanks, Alex. Appreciate it.
Cheers.
The next question we have is from Matt. Matt, do you want to share your question? Okay, I will share it to see if maybe for some reason there may be a connection problem. I'd be interested if you've got any examples of how superfan insights might have improved a brand you worked on, and also what social listening tools you might use to get the juicy stuff.
Okay, so while I'm digging that out, I'll answer the second half of that question first, which is that I am like crap with all of that stuff. So the answer is basically I don't use anything remotely sophisticated. So I'm not saying that you shouldn't, but I just don't have a good answer for you there. I would generally, when it comes to sort of looking for customers, obviously there's classical consumer research, which is great if you can afford it. Then there are forums, which I really like. I think that, Reddit is always super interesting. I know that it's not sort of like, because people just say interesting stuff, like the standard of writing that you get on forums. Mumsnet is another one. It's so incredible. Like, in fact, even for my own personal life, now, I don't really use Google anymore because it throws up such garbage material. So I'll search for the same thing, but in forums. So like, I've got 2 kids. I'll only search for stuff like on Mumsnet. I won't be searching for it on Google because you get such rich stuff done by people. So I know that isn't remotely a social listening tool or anything useful like that, but it's but really day to day, it's the type of stuff that I use. So probably I should be better on that kind of thing. Let me just quickly look at the cards just so I can give you a good answer to the first part. Yes, so there's an example recently, really, but it's actually a kind of work in progress. So I don't really I don't really know if I can sort of like publicly. I shouldn't publicly talk about it, but maybe I can just kind of still illustrate the principle. So it is a kid-related brand that I'm working on, and in this case, like I actually, most of my projects, I don't get much insights from consumers because normally all the brands, if they're remotely switched on, are going to be looking for insights from their consumers. And that means everyone's looking in the same place for an insight. And so everyone's getting the same answers. I prefer to get insights via generating difference with competitors and then post-rationalizing whether or not those things will be useful for customers, like what I explained in the strategy super system. However, sometimes, as per Superfan Secrets, you can get good insights from customers. And in this particular case, we actually found an amazing one. It was about it was essentially about how difficult parents find feeding their kids, which was, for various reasons that I can't get into, very relevant to this category. And it was also very obvious. I'm not giving you any secret. I say super out of secrets. I'm not giving you any secret when I say that parents find feeding their kids very stressful. But actually, there was no brand in this space, or indeed in any space, that was really addressing this glaring consumer pain and consumer need. So it didn't take very long for us to find from people that this was the reason that the majority of them were using this product. And isn't it just incredible that a brand could have their consumers be 80% of their consumers using their product for a certain job, and the brand itself is not aware of it? That this is so normal. This is just like really kind of like standard kind of error that people make. So and it was, and in this case, it was also kind of like, in terms of the super fan element, it was kind of extra interesting because we were looking for people who relied on the product. A person who's bought the product once or twice is not someone who relies on the product. So their reasons for buying the product might be quite boring, low leverage reasons. But if you can find the people who really need the product, they're going to have much, much more rich and interesting reasons for buying it, stuff that has more strategic potential. So that's why I focus in particular in this case on the super fans.
I'm just wondering if you could share what we were talking about just before the call started about this recipe, coming back to the strategy super system, like how it is kind of like the backbone, what you were kind of explaining, how this recipe and how it relates to the rest of the deck.
Yeah. I mean, yes. To reiterate that, it's obviously too much to chew to think of the deck as a completely linear system where I'm going to do 54 exercises and I'm going to plow through them one by one by one. I mean, you could do that, and I'd be interested to see what you come up with. I mean, in theory, that would be great. It's going to take you a long time, but it's going to be a huge labor. And equally, it also doesn't, to me, feel super satisfying to just randomly dip in and just sort of like pull one out and just do it sort of for fun, although that could also generate good value too. So if you want to have a linear flow that gives you the essence of the deck without having to do all of the cards, then the strategy super system is it. And I would probably add on to it if we had been allowed to do more than 5 on there. Just give me one sec. I will just add on a couple more. So this is your strategy, your super strategy super system would be the current one. And then I would include, where is it? Strategy story, absolutely essential for laying it out clearly and checking your thinking. Power platform, that's where you really then translate it into the external sexy brandy stuff that we sort of think of when we think of brand. And let's say creative canvas, because one thing that I also want to emphasize with the deck in general, which maybe you might have inferred by going through it, is that this is not about your logo and your tagline. That is the presentation, the external expression of the brand. but it is not the brand itself, because obviously, like, the most important thing here is what you are actually going to do. And what you just choose to offer, you then need to go out and actually deliver on that. If you say, we're going to offer such and such, well, your first thought shouldn't be, what's the tagline? Your first thought should be, does our product actually do this thing? Do we have to actually change our product? Do we have to change our route to market? Do we have to change our geography, whatever, our manufacturing, in order to deliver on this offer? The ultimate goal here is to deliver on the value that you promise. And the way that you sort of design the branding elements of the business are quite a small part of that. And they should also be kind of like they're sort of like the last part of the flow. It's like you put the gift in the box and then you wrap it. You don't wrap the empty box and forget about the gift. If that was a crap analogy, but you get my point, right? So the creative canvas, it kind of encourages you in some sense to do that and to pull your execution through to a deeper level.
Can you just say those cards one more time? We have Power Platform, Creative Canvas, and what was the first one?
The first one was Strategy Story.
Strategy Story, awesome. We have one more question before we wrap up. And the question is from Chris Kark. Do you want to share your question, Chris?
Chris was the one who couldn't speak.
I will speak for you. Does this deck include assistance with building mission and or vision statements?
No, funny question. So directly, no, because, frankly, because I don't use that stuff myself. The reason I don't use that stuff myself is because I don't really understand it. And I guess the reason I don't understand it is because people have varying definitions and understandings of these terms. So actually, a characteristic of the deck explicitly is the deck does not use, other than the word maybe strategy, the deck does not use a single piece of terminology at all. I don't mention purpose. I don't mention mission. I don't mention vision. I don't mention positioning. I don't mention any of these things simply because they have varying interpretations by different people. So I wanted to actually bring everything back to first principles and describe everything with clean language that doesn't have baggage. So technically, yes, it does answer those questions, but it doesn't do it in the context of now you're going to come up with a mission. Now you're going to come up with a vision. I wanted to just pull everything back to a shared grounding of just kind of like saying explicitly what I mean without any terminology. So in general, I think that will be helpful for people because it kind of like makes everything sort of fresh and you're still getting to the same endpoint. But I do appreciate that that if you are used to working within those structures, then it might be kind of annoying. So sorry about that.
Those are all our questions, and we are also at time.
Cool. And if it, sorry.
Quick question. Just this recording is going to go up on YouTube on our PipDex channel in the next couple of days. So you can, if you want to watch it again, or if you want to share it with people, check out our YouTubes, and all our events will be posted up on our YouTube channel moving forward.
Nice. And I was just going to say, if anyone's got any other questions, you can, if you DM me on LinkedIn, I'm happy to answer them there as well. If you don't follow me on LinkedIn, I'm Alex MH Smith on there. Obviously, I had to be MH because otherwise, who's going to find Alex Smith? So that should make it easy.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Yeah, again, you can also talk to me on Slack, also, the PipDex community. Thank you for coming.